Looking to enhance the appeal and performance of your gym with state-of-the-art equipment? Look no further than the Gym Administrator. Founded by Sal Corrente, professional wrestling manager, promoter, and author of the great book Bruno Sammartino, the autobiography of wrestling's living legend, available on Amazon.com, the Gym Administrator will spot you on that final rep and assist you every step of the way from purchase through installation, whether it be strength training, cardiovascular training, or performance enhancement. The Gym Administrator works with a wide array of leading vendors and suppliers, carefully selected to meet the diverse needs of your clientele. Service the way you remember it. Contact us at 914-494-1066 or visit our website at thegymadministrator.com, as well as all social media platforms. The Gym Administrator. All your fitness needs under one roof. Scan the barcode at the bottom of the screen to get started today.
The Monty and the Pharaoh Show is brought to you by...
Because wine is your second favorite four-letter word. California wine, New York attitude. Good fucking wine.
Yeah.
Evil.
All right, dude. So on a documentary, there's a 5-part documentary on Vice. It's called "Who Killed WCW," and I don't think you've watched it. And forgive me if you have.
No, I haven't.
It's pretty good, kind of. I think they're trying to make more out of it.
5 parts.
It could be. Don't hold me to it. It could be 4 parts. I don't know. Part two was Part 2 was Wednesday or Tuesday. I'm sorry, and it's good though. It's not bad. Okay, but I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you some names, and I'm going to ask you where their contribution lied in the destruction of WCW, okay?
Go ahead.
Ted Turner.
It all starts at the top, obviously, but Ted Turner was never claimed to be a hands-on owner. He let others do the work for him. At the end of the day, it's his responsibility that the company failed. But I would say, God, I don't know how many names you're going to give me, but I would say not a large percentage is overall his fault, even though it was his brand and he owned it. He wasn't a hands-on guy. He let the inmates take care of things, but usually he delegated to somebody who he thought would be able to run it, not necessarily a wrestler or an inmate.
I'm surprised at your comments, though, because being the great Jet fan that you are, you hate, Woody, who's the owner of the Jets, and he's a total hands-off owner, just like you just mentioned Ted Turner. And you're a big, Woody hater, so why wouldn't Ted have more value in the destruction of WCW?
If you want to simultaneously do the Jets, I'll do that too and explain why Woody would have a percentage higher than everybody else instead of Ted Turner.
I'm not ready for Jet talk yet. It's the summertime. Let's just stick to wrestling.
Yeah. I like Woody's money. Go ahead.
Listen, I agree with you, right? Ted Turner, look, he gave, like Woody, he gives the person who's running it for him, here's your money, make it work. Do the job.
Right.
Do it for me.
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Ted Turner has a healthy hand in the demise of WCW to get to the answer. He did enough to have a share, obviously.
Understood. But I am a big Ted Turner guy. I always respected him.
I like him too.
Number 2, Hall and Nash.
Probably a bigger behind-the-scene responsibility than Ted Turner. I would say so. They were, unfortunately, just from so many different accounts from other wrestlers, they unfortunately were the head inmates that ran that asylum. There was bullying. There was, dick measuring, obviously. There was everything that came with being in charge of the pack, for lack of a better term there. Someone's got to take care of the wolves, and they were running the wolves, and that's basically it. I think that a lot of people probably dreaded having to go into the same locker room with them. It could not have been fun if you weren't on their side. So behind the scenes, to me, they have a greater share of the burden in the demise of the company than Ted Turner himself behind the scenes.
So, our friend Sean Oliver, who runs the Click This podcast with Kevin Nash, I don't know how
Yes.
often you watch it, but it's one of my go-to.
I like it.
I do too. It's one of my go-to podcasts.
I like it.
But I'll make a statement about Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash is very intelligent, but
yes,
my belief is Kevin Nash is one of those guys that is never wrong and never takes full blame for whatever he decides to do. The reason I say that, I've seen so many interviews with him, and obviously I watch him on the podcast. And, you know, he seems to be one of these guys that's like, hey, I know I drove drunk, but I happen, not that he drove drunk. I'm using an example in case someone wants to report the channel, right? I am using a fake example. I know I drove drunk, but that can of beer had extra alcohol in it. I mean, that's a stupid example, but there's always a reason why. So when people talk about his poor booking decisions, and they talk about on the last episode, Eric Bischoff had enough, needed a break, and he gave Nash the book. And Nash has an excuse for the finger poke of doom, to taking the belt off of Goldberg, right? Here's the facts, in my opinion. It's all about the results. No matter how you get there. Either you get there because of your knowledge, you get there because you're completely lucky. It's the end result. And the fact of the matter is when Kevin Nash had the book, Kevin Nash failed extremely, terribly. And he also failed in TNA also. Do you agree with me there?
As a booker, I do agree. Absolutely. Of course he failed. And you know what's even funnier is what is Bischoff doing handing him the book anyway?
He said he felt comfortable with Nash's ideas in the industry. Again, we're going to get to Bischoff, and maybe you put more blame on him for giving the book to Kevin Nash.
There you go.
And I will blame Kevin Nash and Scott Hall tremendously for the fact that there's, like anybody else, they took care of themselves. And the end result, it was about themselves. It wasn't about the growth of the company. And when you've got individual players, as the great Greg Gagne said in the last interview, you're destined to fail in the end, right?
Right. Mike, one more thing about Nash, what is the one thing that people who think the way you described Kevin Nash, there was more alcohol in that beer, he can never be wrong. What is the one thing they hate the most? Criticism, especially if it's on the internet. All right. I sometimes think that burns at Nash, and I don't blame him. He took his bumps in this business. He didn't have it easy in the beginning. He got to where he got to by, making sure that he played the game as hard and as rough as he could to get what he wanted to get. And he got it. So to his credit, he got it. But he gets slammed a lot by the internet community for not being a good in-ring wrestler. He takes a lot of shots, for, he sneezed and he hurt his knee. He gets the, you're a pussy kind of thing they give to him. So I'm wondering when he answers about all this stuff, if he's got a huge chip on his shoulder about the internet.
Well, I think he's human, and I think like anybody else, you get defensive. Phil's asking, do you think that Nash did anything on purpose, sabotage? I'll answer this one, Jimmy, then you follow up, okay? This is what I think. I think when things were going good, Nash was going to take all the credit in the world. And when they went bad, Nash was about himself, and he was going to get as much money as he could, and he didn't give a shit anymore. He wasn't a team player. Kevin Nash was about Kevin Nash. Scott Hall was about Scott Hall. And they took no responsibility for any of their actions, clearly.
He ruined Goldberg. Goldberg was the one thing that they had going for them, the one homegrown thing that they had that was mega. And he ruined Goldberg. They had the NWO, was an amazing thing, and then they added everybody. Remember when we got the call to be in the NWO, Mike? We were like, okay, now you've gone too far.
Hey, good comment by a new. I don't think he's new, but Kevin Abruro says, wrestling is fake. Wrestling is fake and boring.
Why is he watching a wrestling show if wrestling is fake and boring? That's really weird.
I don't know. Maybe his life.
I don't want to.
Maybe his life is. These aren't his kids. These aren't his life.
Yeah, I don't want to fake anybody out, but that comment was boring.
Wait a minute, hold on. What's the lines of the song?
This is not my beautiful house.
There you go.
This is not my beautiful wife.
That's right. This isn't my fake wrestling.
Yourself, well, how did I get here?
My name isn't Kevin Abreu. My real name is Lee Cole.
Oh, very good. Very good. Now I'm really bored. Go ahead.
Wow. Hulk
Yeah.
Hogan.
Hulk Hogan. Oh boy. Obviously he gets some of the blame. Um, However, I will say this: when Russo was around and trying to push Jeff Jarrett over Hulk Hogan, and yeah, I mean what I'm about to say, Booker T over Hulk Hogan. No, because all of that was before Hulk Hogan returned and had that classic with The Rock at WrestleMania. So I knew Hogan. Look, Hogan has always had to defend and protect what he is about and what he is. And he stayed on top for a reason. There is no reason why he should ever lose to Jeff Jarrett. I don't want to hear it. All right. There is no reason why in the year 2000 he should lose to Booker T. Bullshit to that. Booker T was way, way off from being ready for that. And if Booker T had been ready for that, then wouldn't have history said so? He won the belt 5 times there, and the ratings continue to be less than Gilligan Island's reruns. All right. So, no, Hogan is responsible for allowing that culture in the back, for letting his boys, Hall and Nash, do all the shit they did. I mean, he could turn a blind eye. Maybe he wasn't the dick himself to deal out all the politics that happened in the back. He probably wasn't. He probably wasn't the guy walking up and going, making fun of or being belligerent towards him. That's not Hulk Hogan anyway. Hulk Hogan has a few small, circle of friends that he stayed tight with, and they wound up running everything down. And it was Hogan has responsibility here, but not higher than Hall and Nash behind the scenes. No way. I'm not buying that. He put over Goldberg when it was time. And then when he puts him over, oh, you didn't do it at the right time. You should have done it on the pay-per-view. Talk about always looking for something to criticize Hogan over, because that's what that all comes down to. And don't tell me he was not still main event guy in 1999, 2000, because in 2002, he's fighting The Rock in an all-time classic in front of 70,000 people who refused to boo him. No. The legacy's there whether you love it or hate it. Too effing bad if you hate him. That's the way it goes. But was he responsible for some of this shit? Hell yeah. Of course he was.
Can't even add on to that, Jimmy. You hit it right in the head. I can't agree more. Eric Bischoff.
He's the guy most responsible.
Wow, really?
He's the guy. He's the guy most. Well, you know what? You have one more name. I'm hoping you're going to mention.
Actually, I have two. I actually have two, and I'm going to tell you the last name to me is the guy that's most responsible. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, you know what? I might have to correct my statement anyway. But there is one who I feel is worse than Bischoff. So he's next to the top of the biggest reasons. He's also the reason why they won for 83 weeks. So massive respect up front to Eric Bischoff before I say some of the mean things I'm going to say. Eric Bischoff is the guy who somehow found a way to conquer Vince for 83 weeks, but he did it with Vince's guys, one way or the other. Goldberg came onto the scene afterwards, and they ruined that. Bischoff let the inmates run the asylum. Made a lot of mistakes doing that, gave ridiculous contracts, people sitting at home. He created a very lazy company that way, only listening to one or two voices and ignoring everybody else, And oddly enough, Ric Flair wouldn't have been a great voice to listen to either, because we see how he's come along over the years. All right. But he needed more wrestling people.
Now, Maria Davis says she agrees with you 100%. Eric Bischoff is the reason.
Yeah, real wrestling minds. And Bischoff did not have he did not have a pure wrestling mind. He had a great business mind, but he also had a massive ego that took him on a rock and roll trip. And Hogan, Nash, and Hall were in the band with him. This was his band, his ego, And it's a shame, but that's the way it goes. At the end of the day, the smarter guy won. And oddly enough, the smarter guy has an even bigger ego, but the smarter guy won. Period. So Bischoff is very responsible. Very responsible. I put him right at the top.
So I agree with you. Great business mind. The one thing, everything you said, spot on. The one thing you didn't mention, though, that is a main driver to all of this in any type of business, Bischoff proved that he's not a leader. And when you can't be a leader, you can't run a business. Follow, right?
I agree. I agree with that.
So the one thing you can't, you can teach leadership, but you have to teach leadership through experience. And Bischoff never had that experience of leadership. And I agree with you. Bischoff is the main driver to their success and one of the main drivers to the failure. All right,
Yep.
Vince
No
Russo.
doubt. To me, he's the nail in the coffin. He's the nail in the coffin, pretty much, because his booking was ridiculous. Coming in and doing all the things he did and trying to turn, without the Vince McMahon filter, it's been proven Vince Russo just absolutely drove that company into the ground. I never knew what kind of traffic accident I'd be watching from week to week. It was a real mess. It was an absolute mess. And he clearly, it's funny that to this day he has an audience of pro wrestling fans that like to hear his opinions on wrestling, but the guy has no, look, I'm not going to take away his life experiences, and he obviously made some friends in the business and stuff like that. This is not a wrestling lifer guy. No matter what he says, he didn't give a shit about wrestling. He wanted to put on a soap opera, Crash TV. I didn't want to see that every week. I didn't want to see that at all. And then he just log jammed all the new guys like we're supposed to instantly fall in love with them without any character development or storylines. He had no concept for what a pro wrestling fan wants to watch. And it was the end.
I think it worked for the time, but once he was on his own, it failed miserably.
Yeah. It was the end.
He just, again, Jerry Springer for that short minute, Morton Downey Jr. for the short minute was a success, but eventually that story became old. And the same thing happened with Vince Russo's writing, right?
Mike, before you switch on to the next person, I got to ask you, in the Attitude Era, because my answer might be different from yours, in the Attitude Era, the true main eventers, the true, The Rock, Mankind, Undertaker, Foley, what to you was the sex angle of the Attitude Era? Was it an additive or was it a preservative? I say long term, it was an additive. It was something that was thrown in during the shows. Sure, you saw puppies, or they did whatever they could sexually to push the. Yeah, DX would say, suck it. But that was usually, was it the preservative of the Attitude Era? I don't think so. I think Mick Foley crashing off the top of Hell in a Cell. I think The Rock with his programs with Austin. I think of Mr. McMahon with the Kiss My Ass Club. I think that those were the preservatives, not necessarily puppies, if you understand what I'm getting at.
I think Vince Russo, you're right, was the end of. Very good comments, dude. Very good comments. All right, next up, Vince McMahon.
Responsible for the demise of WCW? Well, I guess in the end, he is the most responsible because he killed them. So I would say that Vince McMahon probably is the most responsible. He came up with the game plan and he, applied it. He created his own big stars. I would say Vince McMahon is the big reason. He's probably the biggest reason of all because after all, he killed that shark. He took it out.
I think McMahon was the one who destroyed WCW, bro. I think his talents and his knowledge are what did it.
Yeah, absolutely. He was the man with a plan. And he also had the right guys, and he knew what to do with the right guys. Because on the surface, in the beginning, those right guys weren't the right guys. They didn't come there as Stone Cold Steve Austin. They didn't come there as Mankind. They showed up as Rocky Maivia with the little island stuff around his neck and stuff. It was Vince McMahon who figured out what to do with these guys and turned them into the megastars that they became. So he countered by creating from within. He had been initially conquered for 83 weeks by another company that conquered from without.
Right.
They took them from other places. They took the stars that Vince had. Vince, it's the most impressive thing ever when you think about it. Vince took homegrown or imported talent that had never been packaged a certain way, repackaged them, and delivered and conquered. So, yeah, at the end of the day, Vince McMahon is most responsible, and thank you for it, Vince, because WCW had become an absolute joke.
Beautiful. Beautiful. 100%. And finally, Time Warner. Now, mind you, on the second part of the series, they explain how they filtered money. So say Time Warner was making all this money, right? And certain department heads were pushing the money towards WCW. So like one prime example was if WCW was selling $10 million worth of T-shirts, they would take this profit from the $10 million and filter to other departments, but the expense went against WCW.
Well, if you look back on Turner's career, it's kind of lame that he did this earlier with Georgia Championship Wrestling. He never fully appreciated. I don't know if Ted Turner fully understands that the rest of the country gravitated to the Superstation TBS on cable television. Once that channel was able to go to cable television, it's Georgia Championship Wrestling and the Atlanta Braves were the two major things that made people, especially our people, our generation, tune into that station. There's a lot of Braves fans across the country, and there was a shitload of wrestling fans just like you and me, whether we were in New York or Phil up in Boston or Maria over in Pittsburgh or, Chubby Tortello out in San Francisco. We were all watching that. And what does he do? He sells the time slot to the competitor, and we get the Black Saturday and stuff like that. I don't think Ted Turner ever fully appreciated just how important wrestling was to his empire. So we get what we get.
I think Ted did, or at least he loved it enough. I think Time Warner didn't get it. I think the biggest problem, though, Jimmy, honestly, with WCW, and I think Dan and Benny on their show on Tuesday night mentioned it, was they didn't do house shows. So when WCW was beating them in the ratings, the one thing that WWF was able to do was house shows. And they made money off of house shows. WCW didn't do house shows. And house shows are important, dude. You go to signings. I think your wife is going to a signing in a couple of weeks, right? In August or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
She's doing signings. People love to go see the stars. And again, guys, a house show is when you have that opportunity to see. It's like going to a Yankee game live. It's like whatever. It's like you get to see these stars live and you can make money from it. I think the game's changed, right? Back in the day, you used to have to rent out the arena, pay the arena, and then you only got a portion of the house. Now it's like they pay you to bring fans in, and they get all the concessions or what. Listen, I don't know the whole ins and outs, but that is a downfall of AEW, dude. They want to be a television program. I don't think wrestling as a television program is successful. Yeah, plenty of money, but there's more money to be made, right? Merchandising, live house shows, meet and greets, stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. You got to keep the product out there. You got to constantly remind people about it. Wrestling is not as popular as it even is today. I don't think it's something that they should ever take for granted, its level of popularity. If something is working, and house shows have worked for years, then keep doing it. It's not a surprise WCW wasn't doing house shows. The inmates were running the asylum. I don't want to work today, and I can get this big fat paycheck and not work. Why am I going to work?
Hey, Matt Sharkey says, pretty good comment. It's not just what McMahon did, but what he did behind the scenes. He took out the territory systematically and did it with the boy toy. The one thing I got to say is if Vince didn't do this, someone else would have, right? Eventually someone would have. And the only one that was smart enough, I believe at the time, and could get past themselves was Fritz von Erich. Fritz von Erich got it. He just didn't. Unfortunately, his boys had some real emotional problems. I was talking to my wife about the Von Erichs because I'm on a Von Erich kick, dude, right now. I just there's so much into that whole thing. And I was thinking about, because you and I have had this discussion, and we had the great Bob Cook on a couple of weeks ago, and Bob kind of took your stance, and correct me if I'm wrong, that suicide, it takes a man to commit suicide because that's a very difficult thing to do. And I always took the stance that it was very selfish. We've had these conversations, right? Am I fair to say that's your stance on suicide?
My stance on that is both. And I wouldn't even word it the way you worded it. It doesn't take a man. Men and women both do this, obviously.
Right.
It takes some sort of fucking courageous level that I don't understand. I can't get myself to that point, to do something like that to myself. Is it selfish to do? Yes. So it's both. It's really both. I mean, that is one tough. I cannot picture doing it. You really got to not be afraid of the other side for shit.
Well,
sure.
that's what I wanted to talk. You're really smart, because that's what I wanted to ask you. I said to my wife, with everything those boys went through and what they decided to do, the one thing I said to myself is, man, did they have faith in God? Because they were sure they were going to see their brothers on the other side. They were sure there was something after this life. And that in itself is a testament, isn't it, to who they were, I think.
That's a very different way of looking at it. That you could say that takes immeasurable faith. I tend to lean the other way. I don't think you're supposed to take yourself until God says it's time for you to go.
Understood.
But that's how I feel about it. Look, there's people who've been through much worse than me. And yeah, I get depressed, obviously. I mean, hell, you've got Angry Pharaoh, right? The last couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
I get depressed, but I don't get to that point because I do think it's selfish. And I honestly feel like I'd be in big, big trouble with the principal. I don't think it's,
I'm on agreement with you. I remember when Scott Hall was in studio, right? He used to say, we talked about Ashley Massaro's suicide, right? And I remember Scott Hall's word. He wanted no heat with God. Remember that?
Right.
No heat with God. Pretty amazing statement, right?
Right. I mean, I'm sure we both know people who've been through much worse than us. So I think to myself, you know what? Not to get, oh God, I can't believe we're talking about this. Not to get too deep, but this is deep. When I think about the preacher from Nazareth and how he was dragged through the streets all that Friday and beaten and stoned and whipped and had things pulled out of his insides practically, and then he gets crucified. I think I can deal with my problems.
Well said.
Does that make any sense to you?
Well said. And the other thing I think about too, Jimmy, I feel like when people involve drugs in their decisions, their minds become warped, and it becomes easier to do such an act like committing suicide, right? Because your mind's not completely there, right? It's like
I think it depends on what sort of drug we're talking about. I hate blaming drugs for choices, because at the beginning of the point of origin is a choice. If you choose to do drugs and then you choose to kill yourself, what's going to get blamed? The drugs are going to take your choices off the hook? Not in my mind.
Jimmy, goes back to the show what we said about Kevin Nash, right? You make a decision, you got to own the decision and not blame everything else. That it's all about the end result. Listen, dude, you're really spot on tonight. Maybe Angry Pharaoh's the way to go, because you have not missed one question. I mean, I could not disagree with anything you've said tonight.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate
that. Don't thank me. You're the one saying it. I disagree with you if I did, but I'm finding myself in full agreement. Listen, we're going to call